Good evening. The Lawrence family must wonder if they'll ever find out the truth about their son Stephen's death and the Metropolitan Police investigation into it. Today's report by the QC Mark Ellison into the investigation is a disaster for the Met. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, called it profoundly shocking and truly chilling. Mr. Ellison found that an undercover police officer from Scotland Yard's Special Demonstrations Squad infiltrated the Lawrence family group, spying on them in the run-up to the Macpherson inquiry. And he also discovered evidence to suspect that one of the detectives on the original murder investigation, Detective Sergeant John Davidson, acted corruptly. There's now to be a new judge-led inquiry, and Dame Doreen Lawrence has called for criminal proceedings against officers involved. Here's Jim Reid.
It's more than 2 decades since a teenage boy was stabbed to death by a group of racist thugs in South London. Stephen Lawrence would be 40 years old this year. What happened since his murder tells us something about how British society has changed, and maybe how much it hasn't.
But it's taken over nearly 21 years since Stephen's been killed, and the fact that we as a family had to go through all this, and still there's more to come out.
Today's damning report is just the latest embarrassment for the Metropolitan Police in this case. Already labelled institutionally racist and ineffectual, it was finally confirmed today that the force had infiltrated groups linked to Lawrence's parents to try and spy on the family. Just an hour after the report went online, the Home Secretary was on her feet to announce a public inquiry into the use of undercover officers.
Undercover officers, sometimes working in difficult and dangerous conditions, have helped bring criminals to justice. They have stopped bad things happening to our country. But the Ellison Review reveals very real and substantial failings. The picture which emerges from about the SDS from this report and from other material in the public domain is of significant failings of judgment, intrusive supervision and leadership over a sustained period.
Under the spotlight now is that special branch unit, the SDS, which was meant to combat domestic extremism. One of the unit's former members has told Newsnight's Richard Watson he was ordered to undermine the Justice for Stephen Lawrence campaign because senior officers feared public disorder if it started to win widespread support.
Lawrence campaign, a practical day-to-day thing early on, was to find any information, any intelligence that could be used to actually stop the campaign. It was felt by the police at that time, as a very high police, that that disorder was the campaign was being taken over by militant groups, and it was causing or potential for disorder on a vast scale. So any intelligence that could be used to stop the campaign, that's what they wanted from me.
But even more serious were the actions of another SDS officer, still known only by the code number N81. According to today's report, they infiltrated groups close to Lawrence's parents, reporting back to superiors with personal evidence about the family. The presence of this undercover officer was highly questionable. In particular, the Met was strongly criticised for arranging a meeting between this spy and a senior officer who was part of the team drafting a response to the Macpherson inquiry into the handling of the original murder investigation. One of the 5 men who wrote the final Macpherson report described the actions of the police as deplorable.
What you're asking for, the answer to your question is, I think that the damage to the inquiry is that the police were always spending time trying to work out how they can defend themselves instead of actually pursuing the ultimate goal of the inquiry or the reviews, whatever they are, to try and find better ways for policing to be more professional.
A separate report into undercover policing commissioned by the Met today found no evidence that police officers had intentionally smeared the Lawrence family.
We do recognise that allegations like this go to the heart of people's trust in us as a police service. And we're absolutely clear the work we've been doing over a number of years and the work collectively we've done is around trying to maintain high levels of trust and confidence in policing in London. It's absolutely vital to what we do.
But the role of undercover officers goes much wider than the case of Stephen Lawrence. It was at a safe house here in this block in West London that members of the SDS, or Special Demonstration Squad, met to share stories. Some were embedded with extreme right-wing groups, others with animal rights activists or environmental protesters. Their role was so secret that even some senior police officers had no idea they even existed. The SDS was formed in 1968 in the wake of anti-Vietnam War demos to infiltrate homegrown protest groups. By the 90s, its target has switched to political activists. Among its most controversial operations, the claim that one of its operatives planted an incendiary device on behalf of animal rights protesters, and the revelation that undercover policeman Mark Kennedy had sexual relationships with several women during the years he spent infiltrating a ring of environmentalists.
SDS officers ourselves felt we were outside the law, but we felt we were protected by another law, the Official Secrets Act, and the reasons of national security. So whenever any of our officers, which some of them actually transgressed into areas of criminality, were investigated by the police as the uniform side, they always had the Official Secrets Act, the national security blanket, to stop any serious investigation taking place.
The inquiry is also likely to look into revelations that the names of 42 dead children were used by officers to create false undercover identities. In 2008, a group of environmental activists were arrested for stopping a freight train at the Drax power station. Their convictions were quashed earlier this year after it emerged that SDS members had given evidence in court using those false identities, effectively lying to the judge.
There is up to about 105-ish, maybe 110 former SDS officers. I would say almost every single one of them has got a skeleton somewhere they don't want to have out. So you would have multiple litigation claims.
Claims like that could have big implications not just for the Met, but for policing as a whole across the UK. The Stephen Lawrence case might have triggered what will now be a lengthy public inquiry, but the final consequences could be much wider, much more far-reaching than that.
Jim Reid, well, some of what emerged today was not a surprise to the BBC, namely that a former Met officer, Detective Sergeant John Davidson, is suspected of corruption. In 2006, the BBC broadcast allegations made by a colleague of Mr Davidson that he'd been taking bribes in the form of protection money from the father of one of Stephen Lawrence's killers, David Norris, to keep him from prosecution.
Davidson told me he was looking after Norris. I mean, that to me meant that he was protecting him. He was protecting his family against arrests and any conviction.
So you're telling me that a key detective in the first Lawrence investigation was corrupt and in the pocket of Clifford Norris, the father of one of the suspects?
From my conversation that I had with John Davison on that day, I would say that John Davison was receiving cash from Clifford Norris. By his expression that he was using, it was getting a little earner out of it. It was a good little earner. Yes, and that in my mind was corrupt practices.
Well, I'm joined now from Glasgow by Mark Daly, the reporter you saw there in that clip, who's been following the story closely for several years. The film that you made discussed and accused a police officer of corruption. What happened next?
Well, the Lawrence family had long suspected that corruption had played a corrosive role in the investigation of their son's murder. This film broadcast these allegations, really put them into the public domain for the first time properly in 2006. But these are allegations, by the way, that John Davidson denied then and continues to deny today. But what happened next was that the IPCC launched an investigation into Neil Putnam's claims. It concluded that there was no evidence to support them and the allegations were effectively dismissed. Now, this led to a credibility problem for Neil Putnam. It led to the Metropolitan Police launching a blistering attack on the BBC for what it called irresponsible and sensationalist journalism. But thanks to the tenacity of the Lawrences, these allegations refuse to go away. And what the review today by Mark Ellison has done, it appears to have got underneath the corruption allegations in a way that the IPCC failed to do. IPCC is heavily criticised today in Ellison's report, and questions will be asked about why it didn't seem to see what Ellison saw. But make no mistake, today's report is a vindication for the 2006 BBC journalism, but more importantly, it's a real acknowledgement that for the very first time, the Lawrences were right to be suspicious about corruption.
But just before we finish, one further point on the interview there with Neil Putnam. He wanted his evidence to go forward to Macpherson. What happened?
Well, the IPCC said it was satisfied that Macpherson that the Met put everything forward to the Macpherson inquiry. Ellison said today that simply didn't happen. The Met were in possession of information about corruption relating to John Davidson, but it simply didn't get there. Now, Macpherson was suspicious of Davidson, and had he been aware of the existence of some of this information, his conclusions might have been very, very different. But as recently as 2012, Mark Ellison has concluded that the Met was still misleading the public and misleading the Lawrences and saying that all the information they had been handed to the inquiry when it clearly hadn't been.
Marjorie, thank you very much. Well, Dame Doreen Lawrence said today that the Metropolitan Police still, to this day, cannot be trusted. Earlier, I spoke to the Policing Minister, Damian Green, and I started by asking him if she was right.
Well, I don't think you can tar the whole Metropolitan Police with this problem. The vast majority of police officers do a job that's difficult and sometimes dangerous and do it very well and with complete integrity. But what we've found today is that there were even more serious problems, both with the episode, what happened after the terrible murder of Stephen Lawrence, and the whole issue of undercover policing than we knew before. That's why we've taken the steps we have.
An undercover police officer was instructed to infiltrate the Lawrence campaign in order to get dirt on the Lawrence family. Should there be criminal proceedings?
It's not for politicians to say there should be somebody should be accused of a crime. You know, that's why we have police, that's why we have a Crown Prosecution Service. But clearly there needs to be an even more thorough investigation than we've seen in the past.
You know, Macpherson didn't know there was an undercover cop with the Lawrence camp. Does he deserve an apology?
Who, Macpherson?
Yes.
Or, well, everyone who has been a victim of this clearly deserves an apology. I don't think anyone is going to defend the conduct either of the officers at the time who appeared to be involved in this, or those who perhaps shredded the evidence. One of the Ellison findings is that there was mass shredding of evidence. That's appalling.
Hand on heart, had Stephen Lawrence been white and his assailants been black, would the Metropolitan Police have put an undercover officer into the Lawrence family, the white Lawrence family, to try to discredit them?
Well, that's a question only the leaders of the Metropolitan Police at the time can answer.
You understand that that's what people think?
Absolutely, I can quite understand, and I absolutely share all of that. Macpherson famously found that there was institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police at the time. I don't think, incidentally, there is anymore, but clearly all these issues need to be fully investigated, and we need to get to the bottom of them.
Also, Detective Sergeant John Davison, formerly of the Met now, Ellison has looked at him and found that he was trying to aid and abet Dobson to get him off the hook. What do you make of that?
Well, like what everyone else makes of it, that sounds appalling. You know, that's, as I say, that's precisely why we have introduced a raft of new actions now, so that every individual aspect of this, however complex, is properly investigated either by the National Crime Authority, so it's not being investigated by the Met, or by a judge-led inquiry.
Just concentrating now on the undercover officer that infiltrated the Lawrence campaign from the Special Demonstration Squad, do you think that squad was out of control at the time?
All the evidence suggests that it was out of control by modern standards throughout its existence. You know, we have, and not just this government, but previous governments, going back to 2000, have tightened up the way undercover operations can happen. It does seem, on what we see from the reports, that what was happening then was outside the rules even at the time.
There are allegations that members of the Special Demonstration Squad engaged in sexual relations in order to hide their identity. Should there be legal redress?
Well, I think that's one of the things that's been investigated specifically by Operation Hearn, one of the investigations into this. And again, if illegality is proved, then clearly there should be prosecutions.
Just a final point on this. Neville Lawrence said today that he didn't think they could even bear to go through a second inquiry.
Yeah, I can sympathise with that, but I think that not just the Lawrence family themselves, when they reflect on it, but also society as a whole will feel it's taken 20 years to get this far. It is worth getting to the truth. This is such an important case and so